In this last installment of our conversation with Jonah Goldberg, we discussed the origins of his first book, Liberal Fascism, how conservatism has changed since the modern conservative movement started in the 1950s, and finally how contemporary conservatism needs to be more capacious in the way it thinks about itself and how it presents itself to the public.
I'm interested in asking a lot of people about this because I think it's something new to sort of conservative intellectuals in the last 20, 30 years, and that's the recognition and intense focus on the progressivism, the progressive era. You didn't really see that in National Review in the 50s. That was about the Cold War and the New Deal. And then, everybody now, it's a big part of the liberal fascism. George Will is all about this. The administrative state is a little bit jargony and all the rest of that.
Right.
But how did you get on to focusing in on that as a really important or significant thing?
Well, so it's funny. Liberal fascism, as originally conceived, the first aha moment for it, I was going to do it as purely a book on economics, because I was actually listening to the CEO of Nestle talk, and he was explaining his view of the free market, and his view of the free market was, meh. He liked it at the margins for small vendors to impose efficiencies on their supply chain, but other than that, he considered Nestle to be a partner of governments and NGOs, and that was part of the bargain, right? Which is a very fascistic, corporatist understanding of economics. It's this great bargain between big institutions and the state. And the more you look around at American Fortune 50 companies, they're not free market enterprises, right? And so I was sort of fascinated by that, and that was the first thread I started pulling on. And then, talking to my editor about it, there were some other obvious sort of easy parallels about stuff going on campus and free speech. But when I actually started doing all the research and diving into it, I kept finding, there's actually a book called The Ominous Parallels. I kept finding these ominous parallels between and admitted by lots of left-wingers about what was going on intellectually or philosophically with Nietzsche and Sorel and William James and Dewey, and this incredible cross-pollinization between American pragmatism and what Julian Bender called Nietzschean pragmatism. And it was all sort of fascinating stuff, right? Again, origin story stuff. I love that stuff. And then, and I'm realizing there was all of this. I read Patrick Diggins' book on Mussolini in the Eyes of America, and everyone who thinks like I'm making up all this stuff, I'm getting it from this liberal historian, and
he was a good guy,
Diggins and some other people, but and so and then just sort of an attaboy to the Declare monsters. I'm just uncovering all of this hideous stuff about Woodrow Wilson that I had no idea, and I'm talking to my wife about it, and my wife had been a Publius Fellow. And she says, "Oh man, you got to talk to Charles Kessler because he hates Wilson." And I knew bits and pieces of that stuff, but it never clicked into this coherent ideological, intellectual mosaic until I started pulling on the thread of a lot of the stuff that the Claremont guys were doing. And the review in the Claremont Review of Books had a fair criticism that I wasn't open in my praise of the Claremonster project as much as I should have been, but it certainly wasn't intentional, and Lord knows I'm a fan of those guys and all the rest, but
no good deed goes unpunished.
Yes, I know. And but it was, and so I agree with you, it's fascinating. If you go back, and I've done this, I've gone back and I've looked at National Review from 1955 to 1970 for just mentions of Woodrow Wilson. And with the exception of, the Treaty of Versailles stuff and all that kind of stuff, it's just sort of not there. Yeah. And some of the sort of the New Dealers, became National Review guys. There was this very strange cultural thought lines that ran through the progressive movement that made some of these guys into right-wingers later and some of them into left-wingers later. And it's very difficult without a scorecard of keeping all of that straight when you just sort of dive into it. Yeah. But I'll tell you, just you can give me your reaction to this. I'm moving away a little bit from the Claremont worldview, at least in this one regard. I've basically this is where my head is at. I don't think that I think the Tea Party emphasis on the Constitution is great. I think as a political enterprise, it's great. I think the focus that my friends at Claremont, and at Hillsdale, Matt Spalding, all these guys, place on the constitutional order and returning to the forgotten Constitution and how the Progressive Revolution was the Second American Revolution. I agree with all of that. At the same time, conservatism isn't simply constitutionalism. And I've basically come to the position that there is no fundament to conservative fundamentalism. That it emerges. Is epiphenomenally a word?
Yes, it is.
It's an emergent property of Western civilization.
Yeah.
And if you go through Oakeshott, if you go through Hayek, right? The idea that you can, there's all these different factions who want to make it natural law, Catholic natural law, or the Constitution, or or some libertarianism, no harm principle, and all the rest. And at the end of the day, it's all of those things, and it's none of those things. It's a mix of all of them, and a conservatism that tries to get too bogged down in elucidating a core set of principles loses sight of what conservatism actually is.
Yeah, I think the same thing, or the way I think of it is this way: is I think the conservative critique of progressive era puts too much weight on the theoretical parts of it. Wilson's Hegelianism. It was about that, but it was about a whole lot of cultural things. There's the social gospel, and there's just and sort of ordinary reformism that was mostly perfectly fine, right? We don't want corruption in the cities. We want sanitation, and just as you sometimes can put too much weight on that, doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it's too narrow, right?
Right.
And just that the remedy is also going to have to be broader than just a theoretical. The different natural law schools crack me up, right? No, it's got to be this version of natural law, right? And I think that just as an intellectual matter, it's fascinating, and it might be right in some very precise philosophical sense, but for the practical world, that's less important, right? What's more important is understanding that's a bigger story, and that means a broader sort of political and cultural enterprise, and that's my Big Ten. So,
yeah, no, but I was just watching your video with Peter Schramm,
yeah.
And I love Peter, and I'm writing a column about Peter, and the thing is, too much nationalism. There's this trend in history that shows that's a bad thing. I think we can all agree on that, right? But too little nationalism is bad too. And you need some cultural, emotional, mystical glue to hold people together. And the beautiful thing about America is that we've always been a more patriotic country than a nationalistic country. But it turns out that you still need a little of that nationalistic spine. I'm becoming more and more of a Chestertonian, right? The purely rational man.
Right.
The purely rational man will not marry. The purely rational soldier will not fight. We love things before we know things, and I worry that too much emphasis on theory, too much emphasis on rational argument leaves a lot of people cold, right? I mean, it's no surprise to anybody who knows who I am these days that I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's. But Donald Trump's call to make America great again, and he talks very much, like General Hugh Johnson, right? One of these guys from the New Deal who managed to marry a very nationalistic ethos to a liberal program, and he's marrying a nationalistic ethos to his cult of personality. But it just shows you that there's a hunger for that stuff out there, and conservatives need to figure out how to speak in a language, a patriotic language that's not exclusionary, and doing it simply. You have to do it in part about the Constitution, but the Constitution isn't enough.
Yeah, I think that's right.